Has often been associated with the voodoo queen Marie Laveau, who is in fact buried here in the cemetery, whose tomb we will pass by. This tomb and some others like it, which are covered with X's, have traditionally been misidentified as Marie Laveau's tomb. And oftentimes people will they will say that the three X's are a voodoo symbol that basically represents the crucifixion. That it's, you know, the three crosses on Golgotha with Jesus in the middle and his mass and gas tax on either side. And what some people will tell you is that like a lot of Christian concepts, or like a lot of voodoo concepts, so they'll take a Christian one and just turn it on its side a little bit. Now it's a good line, however it is entirely incorrect. Basically, the three X's thing was started by some tour guides in the 1960s who were slightly less scrupulous than I, who, whenever Marie Laveau's tomb is mobbed by tourists, which it almost always is, they would take people over to another tomb and say, well, everybody says that that's the tomb of Marie Laveau, but this is actually the tomb of Marie Laveau. And they started this unfortunate tradition, which is basically just vandalism, pure and simple, where they encouraged people to draw three X's on the tomb and make a wish. And if the wish came true, if Marie Laveau sort of interceded in their life from beyond the grave, then they would come back here and circle those X's. Rather telling, don't you think? Now, in fact, I've only seen one trio of X's that was circled in the entire cemetery, and it was right on Marie Laveau's tomb itself before it was restored. But I had talked to a tour guide who had been here for 15 years, and she said that the X's in the circle appeared on the same day, so take the maps, what you will, burst that bubble, quick, start. Now, folks, Marie Laveau's tomb is actually the, which, again, this is actually the Jean family tomb. Marie Laveau's tomb, which I think will be our slam bang finish, it'll be our last stop today. It's actually the third most visited tomb in the entire cemetery, behind only John F. Kennedy in Arlington National Cemetery. Anybody know who number one is? Sorry? Washington? No, not Washington. Lincoln. Not Lincoln, not anyone respectable, an artist. Jimmy Brown. No. No, not Jimmy. Sorry? Ed Brown. No. Elvis Presley. And like Elvis Presley, a lot of people say that Marie Laveau is not dead. There are some slightly more serious people who say yes, she's dead. She's just not buried in St. Louis number 1. We're actually not entirely sure. We are 99% certain that her tomb is right over there. In fact, it's that white one y'all over here can see it. In fact, there's typically enough. There's some tourists gathered around it now. If she's buried anywhere in the cemetery, she's buried there. It's her family tomb. Both her husband's names are on the tomb. Her daughter's name is on the tomb. It's her tomb as far as we know. We just don't have any physical evidence. We'd have to go in there to the caveau. We'd have to dig it all out. We'd have to DNA test the ash. I don't even know if that's possible yet. We just have to wait for the science to get back to us. Yeah, exactly. I mean, you need a comparison sample, exactly. And ever since everybody and their mothers in New Orleans claims descent from Marie Laveau, it's kind of hard to find someone who is actually descended from Marie Laveau. They did. Yeah, they did. They sure did. They sure did. Though, you know, with kings, it's kind of it's a little different. Yeah. Here, take this Nobel Prize. No, that's not a bad point. That's not a bad point. But I don't even know if taking DNA from ash is even possible. I mean, I suppose they could technically do it from the bone marrow. I've never dug around in there myself and seen if there's any marrow to dig from. But that's a really good point. That's a really good point.
Well, they tell you that it was an inhalation.
Yeah, but not necessarily. You know, you never really know for sure. But basically, you know, Marie Laveau is kind of one of these characters, kind of like William Wallace. Who figures so large into our history, but we actually know very little about. We do know that she started her career as a hairdresser, cutting the hair of the rich and the beautiful here in New Orleans, and that she was, and in those days, the serving class was expected to close their ears to whatever their betters were talking about. However, this was rarely done, and Marie Laveau did one better. Not only did she listen, but she remembered. She had an excellent memory. And so whenever she would see these rich white ladies out in the streets, it could be weeks or even months later, and they might maybe looking a little sad, a little down, and she would say, "Oh, well, is it your husband? Is he in debt again? Or, oh, is your uncle sick?" And then, they would go, "How did you know?" And the legend was born. Now, a lot of legends surround Marie Laveau's life, namely that she lived to be 120, that she never aged, and she could be in 2 places at once. So there is sort of a modern day theory about this legend, namely, it has to do with her family. Basically, Marie Laveau was married twice. First to a free man of color named Jacques Perry, but a bit of a cheater, a bit of a philanderer. He would go off for years at a time with other women. So she just started calling herself the Widow Perry, pretty much renounced him entirely. And the fact that Jacques actually did die a couple years later only sort of added to her mystique, added to the sort of conception that she knew things that she couldn't possibly know. Now, then she met and fell in love with a wealthy white Frenchman, Christophe Lampion. And they had 7 to 12 children together and had what would have been termed a left-handed marriage at the time, basically an illegal interracial marriage. Now, these 7 to 12 children included many daughters. We're not really sure how many, but we do know that they had them. And these daughters looked an awful lot like Marie Laveau. So there's this modern day theory that kind of like Batman, Marie Laveau perhaps was a family business. The first Marie Laveau perhaps handed the torch off to one of her older daughters, and older daughter to her younger daughter, and so forth. Might account as to some of these legends that we've been hearing about. Now, Marie Laveau is the voodoo Loire of Voodoo, and Loire is basically a saint. In fact, incidentally enough, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John also Loires in voodoo. She actually considered herself a devout Catholic, and actually a lot of people are kind of disappointed when they figure out just how kind of prosaic and ordinary a religion voodoo actually is. Still very much a religion here in New Orleans. In fact, perhaps nobody knows for sure, but upwards of perhaps 10,000 people. Maybe that's a little generous, but definitely several thousand do actively practice voodoo here in the city. Voodoo essentially is a sect of Catholicism. And it really wouldn't exist without the African slave trade. Now, slaves that were brought here to Louisiana differed slightly from slaves that were brought from, to Virginia or the Carolinas and Georgia, the British colonies at the time. In that the British slaves went through slave castles in the Caribbean, where they'd be seasoned, a euphemistic term, meaning they'd be broken, had their culture purged from them, and they were domesticated. This was not really the case here in Louisiana. To save money, the French and the Spanish slave owners took their slaves directly from West Africa itself. And basically this meant that they came here with semblance of their culture intact. And they still had a bit of a free spirit. Now, of course, when they arrived, they were forced at bayonet point to convert to Catholicism, so they just made the best of a bad situation, really, incorporated a lot of their West African ancestor worship, a lot of their traditions, into Catholicism. And it's from the direct joining of these two faiths that we get modern-day voodoo, in all its forms in one way or another. And in fact, it's quite interesting because, all that sort of voodoo dolls, all that live and let die stuff, guys would have top hats and snakes going, that's all Hollywood, I'm afraid. It's like, none of it is real. That's all just, centuries of sort of stereotyping and all that kind of stuff. It is really quite an interesting faith. And as you can see, a lot of what voodoo is about is sort of harking back to a sort of older form of spirituality, sort of pre-Christian form of spirituality. And a big part of this is leaving offerings for the gods, or leaving offerings for the ancestors. And you can see that even though this is the Jean family tomb and has been thoroughly discredited as Marie Laveau's tomb, the misinformation persists. People still leave offerings for Marie Laveau. She does like tobacco, alcohol, and money. The best that's always gone. And then, exactly. The hair clips is referring to her career as a hairdresser, and I guess she's the law of love and beauty that mentions there because they want to get pretty sweet. I don't know. All right, guys, we're gonna head over here. We're gonna
They gave her a
sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Remember not to get left behind. Woo. Check that out.
Is that her?
No.